Oh, God bless you, dear. Welcome. Well, oh, please be seated. Welcome to my home. How good of you to come early before the dedication, which will give us some time to chat. Oh, so many wonderful faces I'm seeing. Now, after the dedication, we can come back here and have some refreshments, just to let you know. Henry Clay lent me one of his servants. I'm beginning to see why he selected him. In any event, it's been 20 years since Mr. Madison and I lived in Washington City. We retired after his second presidential term to his Virginia plantation. I didn't want to leave, but now I've returned. It's like returning to life. I must say that I feel like such a relic of the past. I saw Washington City being created, being built. I knew all of the founding fathers and the men that worked with them. Oh, what a privilege. And yet, many of them had brilliant minds. Some of them were just irascible figures. But God bless them, they're all gone now. And I'm the last in connection to them. When I arrived, there was such a flurry of invitations. The first one I accepted, only because the messenger was waiting for my reply, was for today to be the guest of honor at the laying of the cornerstone for George Washington. Now, I want you all to stay close to me. I know who will be there. I can introduce you to President and Mrs. Polk. Mrs. Polk is just a darling. You'll love her. And let's see, is there Senator Buchanan? And one of my relatives, believe it or not, I was, through marriage, I was married to a Todd, and Abraham Lincoln married Mary Todd Lincoln. So we are, well, Mary Todd, not Lincoln. So we are related, and I'll introduce him to you if you'd like. Just so many people, so much fun. Well, when I was 15, I started on this path. My father decided to move us to Philadelphia. He sold his plantation in Virginia, freed all of his slaves, and moved us to the city of brotherly love to reinforce his religious beliefs with the Society of Friends, the Quakers. Although he opened a business, I must be very frank with you, he is not a very good businessman. Not only that, but his total attention was being on a Quaker preacher. Many called him a zealot. But it was just such a remarkable time leaving this rural culture of ours and suddenly being in the midst of a thriving city. Well, there was brick buildings, chock-a-block, as far as the eye could see, and there was cobblestones paving the streets, and so many shops with wonderful temptations in the latest fashions. I must take a note from you. I suppose you ladies are wearing the latest fashions, and I'm just such in the old style here. But just so exciting. And in the year of our Lord, 1887, Philadelphia was the capital, temporary capital of this country. And George Washington was president over the Continental Congress, and they were such men as Jefferson, Hamilton, Franklin. They were all forging the Constitution to bind our separate states together. How exciting. Well, you could literally bump into them walking down the streets. Now, have any of you met George Washington? Any of you? remarkable man. That's why I'm so honored to be as one of the guests of honor today. He dedicated his life to forging our country. Oh, he was an impeccable dresser. He had impeccable manners, and oh, I have to tell you how he loved to dance, particularly with pretty ladies. He would guide you on the dance floor, and I have never had a better partner. I danced with him as much as I could. Well. But the great disadvantage of being in the city of brotherly love is being under the intense scrutiny of the matrons of the Quaker Society. Apparently, how I wore my dress, how I wore my hat, how my shoes were, I caused great offense to these ladies. And if you met them, you would understand it would be very easy to cause great offense. Keep on there, keep on. Faster, faster, thank you, thank you. So they decided to form me into their perfect image. Not an easy task, to be sure. You know, even, how can I say this? Even when I was just walking down the street with one of them, I think it was, lovely color, walking down the street with one of them, they said, "Dolly, thee must cover your face with your hands, as all the men are looking at thee." Well, obediently, I covered my face with my hands. I also covered a huge smile because it reminded me when I was a little girl. My mother always said a fair complexion is very highly prized. So whenever I would go out, she would make sure I had a linen mask stitched into my bonnet and to protect from any sun, and also wear long gloves. I wonder what she would have thought of that vanity. The Quakers believe in hard work, and if anyone fails in business, it is a sign of a weak character. With my father, it was bad business sense, but they read him out of the Pine Street Meeting House in total humiliation because this is what he strived for. He took to his bed and let us fend for ourselves. Now, my mother, well, there might be something about a weak character in there. My mother opened our home to boarders, genteel boarders, mostly members of Congress. And there was so much to do and so few hands to do it, which is why I was stunned when my father called me to him and announced that he had formed an allegiance and I was going to marry John Todd, a young up-and-coming Quaker lawyer who had befriended him when he was shunned by everyone else. A handwritten thank you note saying you were so grateful would have done the same. You don't have to give him one of your daughters, for heaven's sakes. Well, I did not want to marry and leave our house, but I couldn't disobey my father. So, reluctantly, I gave up my girlhood and married Mr. Todd. We fell so in love, and within a year, our first son, Payne, was born. Oh, how we adored our son. Well, still do, but I can see some issues that he may have. But 18 months later, yellow fever ran through Philadelphia, and my husband took us out of the city to a place of safety. I was very large with child and had to be carried on a litter. My husband went back for his parents. Unfortunately, they both succumbed to the disease on the same day. He took care of his parents, of course, and some neighbors, and then returned to me. I heard his voice in the hall, and I was squealing with joy as I ran to him and threw my arms around his neck and thanked God for his safe return. John pushed me. "Husband, how have I offended thee? Did thee not hear? I told you not to approach too close." "No. I know I have the disease in my body, but I had to see you one last time. I remember looking into my beloved's face when everything went dark. That was the last time I saw my husband. I became very, very ill, deathly ill, as did my 3-week-old son, William, who quickly followed his father to the grave. I was prostrate with grief. I can't tell you. The only thing that gave me a little bit of comfort was that they were together. Well, once I recovered and it was safe enough to return to our small brick home, I took my 18-month-old son with $19 in my pocket. The next onslaught happened 2 days later, when my husband's brother, James, there's a lot of James and Johns in this, so if you fall behind, let me know and I'll catch you up. James came about my husband's estate. Now, ladies may know that during the act of coverture, when a woman marries, she loses every individual right of her own and becomes his property. Men, as do her children. The law also stipulated that a widow could not raise an underage child. Well, James wanted to take our son, not his son and mine, but John's son and mine, to raise him as his own. Oh, how I fought him. I fought him with everything I had. I even hired the services of a Philadelphia lawyer. We settled out of court. I kept my son. And this is the ironic thing. In my husband's will, he even said I could have the children. He even said I could have his whole estate. Well, James kept the estate monies. He kept them in trust for my son when he became of age. The simple fact that as a widow, I must find a husband to provide for me and for my son. Even though I was in mourning, a number of candidates applied for the position, if you will. There was a Mr. Savage, a rotund gentleman who directed his entire conversation to my bosom. I wanted to go like this, you know. And then there was a pig farmer who announced his presence without even opening the door. There were so many others that I won't bore you, but during this time, Aaron Burr wrote me a note. Now, Aaron Burr stays at my mother's boarding house quite a bit. He wrote me a note that he wanted to bring a friend by at 6 o'clock this evening. Would that be convenient? Well, Aaron Burr showed up with the undertaker. I assumed he was the undertaker when I saw him on the street because he was all dressed in black. He was dressed in the old-fashioned revolutionary style clothing with knee breeches and stockings and a wig pulled back at the neck. And he was about 5 feet tall, and he looked like a good wind would blow him over. I was introduced to James Madison. I'd heard the name. I wasn't familiar with him. A very quiet man. Not chatty or winning ways. Well, he was better than the rest of them. I also received a note from Martha Washington. We're related through family marriage, and she asked if I would come to tea. Well, when I arrived, I was startled to see Mrs. Washington in a flurry. And once the servant left, keep on. Once the servant left, she burst out saying, "Dolly, is it true? I heard directly from Aaron Burr, a very reliable source, as you know, that Mr. Madison had told him that once he saw you walking on the street, he couldn't sleep until he was properly introduced to you. Apparently, you have set the confirmed bachelor's blood to boil, and he would make a very good match for you. Mr. Washington and I believe that this is a very solid match. So, did he propose?" Well, my face must have been glowing red because it felt very hot. And I said, "No, he did not propose." So she went on. There's no end to her sometimes when she just gets going. So she said, "Well, if you're concerned about marrying an older man, I must say, don't be concerned at all." And I said, "Well, he is 17 years my senior. My first marriage was to a man 20 years my senior. It was a very agreeable match. I slept soundly at night, and he left me a very wealthy widow." Well, I said that not only the age difference, but I was concerned that Mr. Madison wasn't a robust sort of man. And would I be a widow in the near future? 1 week later, Mr. Madison did propose. He first declared, "I will only marry for love." I don't have that luxury. And then he went on that he was engaged once to a young lady who broke it off by sending him a letter sealed with rye dough showing her, signaling that her feelings had soured. She just broke it off. And then hardened his heart against all females, apparently, until he saw me. And now he trembles at the prospect of me being his wife. He reminded me of a little dog that was, how excited they get. To my surprise, I married Mr. Madison 4 months after I met him. It wasn't for love. How could it be? I was still in mourning for my beloved husband and son in the ground not 8 months. Yet I knew Mr. Madison was from a very good Virginia family. I knew that he was wealthy and powerful, and that he would be a very tender and generous parent to my son. As he was not a Quaker, I was read out of the Quaker meeting house. It's starting to be a family tradition, and released from their rigid beliefs and dress. Now I can wear all of the latest fashions, and I can afford to do that. And now I socialize with the founding fathers. I was not born with a silver spoon in my mouth, but I got here as soon as I could. Thank you, Mr. Madison. 7 years later, Thomas Jefferson was elected president and nominated my husband to be his Secretary of State. At this point, the capital was in Washington City. It took us 5 days of going over rutted, muddy roads to travel the 90 miles to get there. And once we got there, we were greeted by a raw slash of land. There was only one muddy road running through the city. It was called Pennsylvania Avenue, and the President's Mansion and the Capitol Building were the two large buildings on either side of it. Well, there was a scattering of public buildings, there was some residential homes, a hotel, and a church. No library. And that was all that could recommend it to anyone. Oh, I forgot, I'm sorry, beg your pardon. There was a lovely swamp that afforded excellent partridge shooting. And the mosquitoes were large and hungry enough that you could use them as target practice. Well, I exaggerated. So, my husband was inundated as being Secretary of State, and I suddenly learned all the political issues that was forcing our government not to function well. The two parties hated each other. The Federalists and the Democratic Republicans hated each other. What? I can't describe how duels, fisticuffs, and brawls would break out in the halls of Congress over a difference of opinion. Really? Oh, can you imagine fighting a duel over a difference of opinion? I had that with Mr. Madison many times, and we didn't fight, duel. Well, we have the mechanisms for the government to function, but not the will of the parties. It wasn't that way with George Washington. He had all the votes. Everybody wanted him and agreed with him. Well, with John Adams, it started to splinter a bit. And there was a great break when Thomas Jefferson became president. The Federalists wanted a strong government. The Democratic Republicans wanted a weak government with the power in the hands of the state. And Mr. Jefferson did nothing to heal that rift. I will share you with this. My husband, at his dying day, believed that our great Republican experiment might actually fail. Really? Well, there was great excitement when my husband negotiated the purchase of the Louisiana Territory. I saw the original land grants, and England granted land to us from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River. The French, British, and Spanish claimed lands west of the Mississippi. Spain wanted to sell us the land from the Canadian border and some parts, small parts of Canada, down to the Gulf of Mexico, from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains for $15 million. If you work that out quickly, it's less than 4 cents an acre. Well, France at the time had plans, and this is through our spies, to invade England. And they wanted their money quickly. Well, we sent over 3 million gold as soon as we could and had to negotiate with British banks, that's an irony, to pay France the remaining of the money. So Britain is giving France enough money so they can build, well, it was just ridiculous. So it removed, that one purchase removed the French from our border, doubled the size of our country, and opened westward expansion. Oh, we cheered them off. Our friend, Mr. Meriwether Lewis, was named the head of it, and he invited his friend, Mr. Clark, on the expedition. Mr. Jefferson decided to send, and I just said that quickly, an expedition to look at all the land. So Congress donated some money for the expedition. They didn't donate nearly enough. And when I found this out, that threatened to stop the expedition before it even started. When I found that out, I went around raising money. Dear, would you like to raise money give me money for the Lewis and Clark? Would you like to raise, okay. I raised money for the Lewis and Clark expedition, and so did many other people. I even bought badly needed supplies for them. Then they set off to great cheers. What I only recently discovered, that they were in great danger, not only from the Indians and the wild animals, but one of our generals, General Wilkinson, was in the pay of the Spanish government to be their spy. He advised the Spanish of this expedition. Now, the Spanish didn't want us moving westward, so they sent out 3 teams to track them, turn them around, or take them prisoner. That's how much they didn't want us to expand, because they felt we might be looking at the land that they held to the Pacific Ocean. The last expedition of theirs, the last one looking for Lewis and Clark in this wilderness, consisted of 600 soldiers. Now, you cannot tell me that that was a peaceful mission trying to turn back Lewis and Clark or take them prisoner. The Indians were very concerned, and they tracked them because they wanted to keep an eye on that many Spanish. Well, after 8 years, my husband was then elected president. And I set about, oh, I heard a yawn. Did I hear a yawn? No. I set about making sure Mr. Madison's presidency was as smooth and as successful as possible. I knew some of the issues, and I started to tackle them. The first was the presidential mansion was always the mansion for the president. It was his private residence. Well, it was impressive from the outside, let me put it that way, but deteriorated in the inside. It was decorated higgledy-piggledy with furniture from leftover presidential furniture. There was a leak in the roof. It was drafty, and Mrs. Adams hung her clothes, her wash, in the east room because there was no fenced-in clothesline for privacy. Instead of a flag, is the presidential drawers waving in the breeze trying to signal the president is in residence? Well, I was given money. I spent all of it. Now, the presidential residence, decorated with wonderful furniture, all made in America, and it reflects the power of this nation. Oh, you should see the lovely hand-painted chairs with the cushions, very fluffy cushions. Oh, lovely. Then I threw open the mansion to be a hub of social entertainment. Yes, every Wednesday I would throw open the mansion. At first it was called the Wednesday Squeeze, and then it was known as the Wednesday Crush because, well, we entertained between 300 and 500 people. I did that inviting both parties. I entertained both parties at dinner. I brought them together as often as I could and introduced people who would be of mutual benefit to each other, businessmen, politicians, anyone that would be able to break down the barriers. Now, our government is functioning much better. There are compromises being made, and just because people have gotten to know each other and appreciate each other. Do you know in Washington City, to keep them so separate, that a little bit more cleaning and less snoring there, yeah. I know why Henry Clay lent you to me. Anyway, I can't even think of where I've been, because I know I have to clean so much and get so much ready, and he is not the dynamo that I had hoped. Well, I also set about harnessing what I consider the greatest untapped resource in Washington City: women. I've known for a long time that we needed an orphanage. And I decided that I sent out personal invitations. I put a notice in the newspaper that we would be meeting on this day to establish charities, and all were invited. Well, that's how my favorite charity, the Washington Orphan Asylum, got founded. I was the directress, the first directress of it, and donated a cow plus some cash. And whenever I can, I help raise money for them. Other charities were also established. Ladies, that lesson teaches us we don't have to ask for our men's our men's permission. All we have to do is join together and go about on our own path and look at the wonderful things that we can create. My husband faced, don't worry, this will go on for just another 2 hours and then we'll be through. My husband faced the most difficult decision in his entire life when he was president. The French and British were at war. The English would stop our ships in the ocean, take off sailors, hardy sailors, to be impressed into their navy to fight the French. This was happening when President Jefferson was in office, and because the English were also helping us defeat the Barbary pirates, he let the insult slide. The English were now getting more aggressive. And then they signed the Embargo Act, which is an act that they're going to intercept our ships and steal our whatever merchandise is on the ships, whatever they want, and also take men for their navy. Well, you can imagine the millions of dollars this cost our merchants, particularly those in New England who wanted to join back with England and secede from the United States. What a terrible, terrible situation. On June 12th, in the year of our Lord, 1812, my husband declared war on the most powerful nation of the world. What an uproar! What an uproar! Well, let me see. We have 20 ships in our Navy. England has 1,000. We have 7 7,000 in our standing militia. England has about 250,000. There was such hatred. My husband, many men refused to fight. But there was nothing we could do to defend ourselves and our honor. Initially, our Navy had tremendous success. The USS Constitution sank a lot of English vessels, and because of the unique way the sides were built with extra heavy oak planking, the cannonballs seemed to bounce off. So it earned the sobriquet Old Ironsides. And then Captain Decatur, oh, over here, honey, your parents are here. Captain Decatur of the USS America pounded the British frigate Macedonian into surrender. They took her as a prize of war. Now, the sailors quickly took the captured flag. They raced to Washington City, to Tomlinson's, where we were having a large party in their honor. The sailors threw the doors opened. They marched in, displaying the captured flag. And when they approached me, they knelt and placed it at my feet. I was so humbled by our brave sailors. It was such an honor. The room erupted into cheers. God bless them. I'll never forget that evening. The British were fighting France, so they had hardened troops and wonderful commanders. We had hardened troops and wonderful commanders 40 years ago. Now the pickings are slim. General Armstrong, who's the Secretary of State now, said, Canada, that's where the British are going to fight us, along the border of Canada. He sent most of our troops there. He said, the British are going to leave our ports, just not even look at them. That's where the fighting's going to be. And yet my husband advised that we have defenses on Washington City just in case they didn't follow his plan. Well, 2 years after the beginning of this war in August, the British went up, I can't even talk, sailed up near Washington City with 22 warships and 24,000 seasoned British soldiers. There was a panic, an absolute panic. One of our generals, Wider, said, all right, we'll take whatever militia we have and do a stand 10 miles away in Bladensburg. The rest of our forces were in Canada. No way they could help us. On that terrible day, it was a hot and humid day, when my husband left to join them. He took most of his cabinet just to strengthen our poor soldiers. Our poor soldiers. Oh. My husband said that he wished that I had the courage to stay there without him, and yes, of course, I did. And he whispered a few private things to his wife that I will not share, and left, beseeching me to take care of myself. Now, earlier on, when I had been entertaining the Turkish minister, he had given me, Tunisian minister, I did entertain the Turkish minister, Mele, but the Tunisian minister had given me a sword, saying men of his country, women of his country, dance and balance it, carrying on the honor of their husband. At first I thought, well, what a useful gift. Now, although I'm a Quaker, I believe if anyone comes against me, I will fight. So I keep that handy Tunisian sword right by my side. I can't tell you the agony I went through waiting for news. It was like every minute was an hour, and I lived a lifetime. I didn't sleep that evening, listening, hoping that my husband would return. The next morning I went onto the roof and took the spyglass and looked and searched, looking for what. Oh, I was hoping my husband would be victorious at the head of the army. Instead, I heard cannonade, and I realized the battle had just begun. It felt like hours and hours and hours. I was just up, walking, looking, seeing anything, looking through my spyglass, and look, suddenly, there was a cloud of dust. That much dust shows that there are a lot of men there, just. And I kept, oh, come closer so I can make it out. Come closer so Our defeated soldiers were streaming to Washington City. The other soldiers we had were in Canada, and what General Armstrong left to protect Washington City was 2 cannons, no ammunition, and no one to fire it. We were helpless. My husband kept on sending me notes that were written in pencil, and the last one said, "You must be ready to flee at a moment's notice. I feel that the British will overcome us," and they had. I was quickly packing all the trunks I could, treasures from the executive mansion, like the Capitol, the Declaration of Independence, other important papers, some silver that was given to our country, silver plate, and put that in there. And I was packing as much as I could. For my husband and I and our servants, I only packed a few clothes, some books, a small travel clock, and I had to let the rest go. I didn't have enough room in the carriage because I took care of trying to protect the treasures first. Well, at this point, one of our neighbors came rushing and said, "Dolley, you must leave now. The British are already in their city. They want to capture you and your husband, and they may well do it." Sorry, children. And I said I would not leave until I took down the biggest treasure, a picture of George Washington. And we struggled to get it off. We didn't, they did. Trying to unscrew it, and then I said, break it down. And once they got the picture out, 2 men from New York had just been passing, and we gave it to them to keep safe. And I jumped into the carriage. Well, I don't mean to tell you that I had received a note from the commander who said that he looked forward to me entertaining him in a few days' time. I had a dinner set out for my husband, and when the British came, broke down the doors, ransacked the house, and set it to fire, first they entertained themselves and had the meal and also toasted to my health. And Admiral Cockburn, how do I say this? The ladies will understand, took my portrait and also my favorite cushion. He wanted to, well, Our house was gone. Meanwhile, as I was on the road in the carriage going to our neighbor's house, I noticed that you couldn't go very fast because our poor soldiers, and by the way, the soldiers had heard the rumor that the British had poisoned the water, so they were suffering terribly. They weren't drinking the necessary water and they were just collapsing. Well, everything was slow. People had left. It was crowds of people in their wagons and everything from chairs to chamber pots. Oh, I left my favorite chamber pot. Oh, I didn't have room anyway. When we got to my neighbor's home, Mr. Carroll's home, he wasn't as mad at me, but I didn't sleep a wink. I just worried about my husband and slept fully clothed on the bed in case I had to escape the British. Well, the next morning, the British were at it again. They went and burned Washington City, but suddenly, anything that they hadn't burned the day before, suddenly a great cloud came over and it turned the sky like it was night, and there were howling winds and there was thunder and lightning, and some of the houses were picked up from their foundations and put down. Others lost their roofs, and our two cannon were moved. Well, the British soldiers, I later understood, thought it was a sign from God. No, it was a sign from our republic that we were very upset, and woe be to them, because we would take our revenge. Well, the British continued to loot down the coast. They didn't take Fort McHenry or Baltimore. They were heading then to New Orleans. The British made one mistake. Well, I shouldn't say one. There were several that they made. They should have never burned our city, because the men may have not wanted to fight before. They didn't want to fight in Mr. Madison's war, but burning down the Capitol, oh, that's another matter. The patriotic fever came to the fore, and there were men that just said, well, I won't say, but that's what they said. So the British thought, well, New Orleans, that'll be easy. We'll just take control of the Mississippi River. Andrew Jackson, oh God, I wish he was in Washington City. Andrew Jackson was in charge of the defense of New Orleans. He raised a ragtag army which consisted of militia. By the way, the militia in our country, they're called on when our standing army, which is too small, needs help. The militia, the state militia, they get together every month, they march around a bit, and then all get drunk. So he gathered militia, he gathered Native Americans, he gathered free men of color, anyone he could find to defend New Orleans. He also put up some impressive barricades. The British made a second mistake. There is a den of pirates just outside of the mouth of the port of New Orleans. They go after the Spanish ships and for treasure. Well, the British went to the captain, Lafitte, and said that he would make him an officer in the British Navy. He would give his pirates untold wealth if they would just fight the Americans with him. Mr. Lafitte said, "Thank you very much, I'll consider your offer." Now, for a British to ask for help from the French that they had just defeated, well, anyway, Mr. Lafitte then went to Andrew Jackson. He told them the British plans and said, if you will have your President Madison pardon me and my pirates of about 1,000 men, I will help you send those British to the devil. Andrew Jackson took him up on that. Lafitte had such a cache of weapons, so many tons of barrels of gunpowder, which, by the way, had the Spanish seal on it, and they brought cannon with them. Oh, how lovely. They were so valuable that during the Battle of New Orleans, the pirates were used to cannonade. They were used to fighting. In fact, they joked back and forth about it. It wasn't any big deal to them. That's how they made their living. It steadied our troops. So when the British attacked New Orleans, they were soundly defeated. As it happened, Britain sued for peace, and neither side gained anything. However, the United States Navy and the United States itself was treated with respect. Britain never, ever challenged us again. We had won our second war of independence. Of course, my husband was, everyone was just thrilled, the outcome. Who would have thought? When we rode into Washington City, I can't tell you, our hearts were broken. It was burned. It was just chaos. Our executive mansion, or presidential mansion, as you might call it, was burnt entirely. But the sandstone stood. It was cracked, but it stood. So we had it painted white, and so it wouldn't look so desolate. And now people start calling it the White House. Congress, on the first vote, had decided to leave. They wanted to abandon the city, and I said, if you do that, the British have won. Our forefathers wanted us to build and stay in Washington City, and we shall rebuild. I campaigned hard for that, and, well, a very narrow vote, and we decided to stay. Oh, but where are my manners? It must be time for us to leave for the dedication. Oh, gracious. Please, as I said, stay close to me. We'll have some food, some treats. Oh, lovely. You got all that done in an hour. How sweet. Oh, what a, we should have had you at the Battle of New Orleans. You would have flashed them. So, I would like to share a treat with you afterwards, so if you would like to return, I'm having oyster ice cream, and you will love it. Do you have any questions? Now I talk to you deaf? Any questions?
What years was James Madison the president?
He was president from, elected in 1809, and he served for 2 terms. So, are you trying to discover my age? I'll never tell. Other questions? Sir?
What was your education?
What was my education? Well, it was Quaker, born and bred, but I learned a lot just from my husband's, and so much from Mr. Madison. He was just an exceptional mind. He really was. So he taught me a lot of things, so I could interact with people. I could be, I sent and received coded messages for him, and yes, he taught me a great deal. Was that just straightening your hair? Yeah, all right. She had an itch, ladies and gentlemen, don't worry. Yes, my dear.
What happened to your son?
Well, a mother likes to think that her son will maybe settle down, and he had all kinds of opportunities. We sent him to Ghent with the signing of the treaty between Britain and America, and well, he was treated like the son of a king, and then he went on to Paris, and I just hope he marries someone sensible and settles down. His debts are ruinous, and I've had to sell a great deal of property. But he's my son. Oh, yes.
Considering your Quaker heritage and the efforts that your father made to free his slaves, what is or has been your relationship with people of color?
That's an excellent question. I feel that we are all equal. Unfortunately, some are held in slavery, but that is not something I approve of. But my husband owned them, and well, my father freed them, which was a wonderful thing to do. It was a Quaker teaching. Anyone else need to go to the bathroom? No? Yes, my dear.
How much were you involved then in the rebuilding of the White House?
Yeah. Well, there was quite a bit. I mean, as I said, I campaigned hard to make sure we stayed and rebuilt this beautiful city. And I helped raise funds. I did whatever I could, volunteered. It was just such a mess, and we couldn't let the British win. We absolutely couldn't. And that's what I thought. I mean, yes, it would be easy to move to Philadelphia. Oh, yes, all the accommodations, the buildings were already there. They'd already used them. Oh, life would be great. No, it wouldn't. We would have lost. Other questions? My dear?
Did you ever go abroad?
No, I didn't. I was too busy taking care of Mr. Madison, who can be quite a handful. And even on his plantation, you'd think, oh, well, you know, you had a life of leisure. No, anyone who came down the turnpike expected to be entertained at our home, and they were. And back then, I don't know how you are now, but anyone who stayed would be offered accommodations to stay the night, and they were never asked when they'd be leaving. They could stay as long as they wished. So basically, we were having a wayside inn in the countryside. Really, I kept a spyglass on the porch, and I saw how many people were in how many carriages. And then I knew that I had to prepare for that number, for dinner anyway.
So you never had advance notice?
No. No. This is how it was. One day for July 4th, oh, you know, it's a lovely day. We had 97 people. We had to stretch table upon table with white cloths over them to try and entertain them all. 97 people. But who's complaining? Other questions? Yes.
How much did it cost to rebuild Washington?
I don't know the precise figures, but it was millions. It was absolute millions, and it would have been even more had we abandoned it, because then we would never live that down. So we spent the money and rebuilt it, and it is so beautiful today. Oh, well, as you saw, yes. Oh, scratching? No question. Just a yes, sir.
Since your city was all burned to the ground, and part of that road was rebuilt back to the original design, was there any argument, discussion about changing the design of the project?
Well, there was some, but the whole city wasn't burned to the ground. There were residential homes. As long as you didn't fire at the British soldiers from the homes, they would leave that alone. But if you fired from one of the windows, they would take the residential houses as well. But yes, there were some discussions about, oh, maybe changing this, but basically we wanted it back to where it was. Yes?
I really shouldn't say this, but I will anyway. Did you ever meet Francis Scott Key?
No, I've heard about him. He wrote the famous song. I'm sorry, well, maybe I did entertain him and didn't realize, but that's a very good question. Brilliant man, brilliant man. They never took Fort McHenry. Other questions?
Any last questions for Dolley?
I want to say thank you so much. You've been wonderful. I'm talking of the children, the rest of you forget. No, you have been very, very good. And I want to congratulate you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You must come and visit me whenever you like. All right, then I think that might be it. Thank you. Thank you.
So thank you, Sally. Thank you, Paul, as well.